It is hard to describe this experience with language we know on Earth. It was like a bright, yellowish, warm light. I was feeling as if I was bathed in an absolutely infinite, unconditional love.
Frau Bögli, genau an Ihrem 21. Geburtstag.
Ms. Bögli, it was precisely on your 21st birthday you experienced rather dramatic events in the hospital, which resulted in a close brush with death. One wouldn't wish for something like this as a birthday present, albeit in retrospect it may have turned out to be exactly that. What happened back then? How did this experience come about?
Also was die Geschichte zuvor war, das war, dass ich war kerngesund.
Leading up to these events, I was in completely perfect health. I was well. On the other hand, I cannot say the same thing for my father, who was seriously ill with leukemia, and it had been obvious for some time that he was terminal. These were very difficult months for us. At this time, my father was in the hospital, and we were all gravely distressed about his condition. My grandmother was hospitalized in a different clinic and was also seriously ill. We were very concerned about both our relatives. I, however, was in perfect health, like I said before, and a company retreat was coming up on the weekend, which exactly coincided with my 21st birthday. I felt very well at first. I was in great shape and 100% in good health. I had no complaints whatsoever. Then, out of the blue, I noticed renal issues and problems with my urinary tract, which sent me to the bathroom every other minute, and there was a lot of new blood in my urine. I thought that something was wrong, and I suspected an acute urinary infection, but I assumed it would suffice to see a doctor the next day. I told myself it was going to be fine. However, these issues worsened and intensified quickly. Suddenly I had severe colic pains. I wasn't able to stand up straight anymore. I writhed and even screamed with pain. Someone called an ambulance and I was taken to the nearest hospital. While in transit, I received an IV. Upon arriving at the hospital, I was taken to a general exam room and told to wait. A doctor would soon attend to me and do an ultrasound of my kidneys. I should just wait. While I lay there, all I could think of was the pain I was in. It became almost unbearable. When the physician entered the room, he was terrified upon seeing my condition and even turned pale as he came to my side and explained that the IV hose had been ruptured. For that reason, I hadn't received the liquids that the IV was supposed to provide. But on the contrary, blood was drained from my system. He then removed the ruptured IV hose and said he needed to call for additional support from clinical staff. He cautioned me to keep lying still and not to look down. He then rushed off into the hallway and shouted for help. My thoughts were that this was not normal procedure.
There was a lot of dramatic action going on indeed.
Exactly. It wasn't until then that I fully noticed that something was wrong. I'm not easily intimidated at the sight of blood and thought I'd risk a sneak peek at the floor. I was extremely shocked to see that the entire floor was covered with blood in front of me, behind me, next to me. Everything was drenched in blood. I thought to myself that the blood was probably mixed with some liquids from the IV, but nonetheless I knew that I had lost massive amounts of blood. But other than noticing this, I didn't concern myself too much. Then things happened very quickly. The physician in charge returned with other clinical staff, who were quick to clean up all the blood on the floor. An ambulance vehicle took me to the emergency room. No ultrasound diagnostics were performed on me. Instead, I was taken to a different department of the hospital. There I was left to myself again, just lying there, as anyone who has ever been in an emergency room will know. To my left, right, and in front of me, there were curtains and the wall behind me. At first, I was in a lot of pain, as I said. And then, all of a sudden, it was as if the room had dissolved. From one moment to the next, I was no longer in the hospital. My soul immediately progressed elsewhere, as if it had gone to a different room. Everything worldly was gone.
So you were never unconscious? Your waking consciousness simply continued?
Exactly. After my own experience, I later learned that many people with a similar experience first pass through a kind of tunnel or see their own body from a remote viewing position. This wasn't the case with me. I rather felt as if I was bathed in pure light from one moment to the next. It was an ineffable condition. It is hard to describe this experience with language we know on Earth. It was like a bright, yellowish, warm light. I was feeling as if I was bathed in an absolutely infinite, unconditional love. I had the feeling that I was a drifting soul.
Ich hatte das Gefühl, ich floate als Seele dahin.
I was simply fine. I wasn't in any pain anymore.
Das war einfach so ein Baden. Ich kann das wie so.
It was like bathing in pure bliss, and at a degree that I can't put into words. I never felt anything like this on Earth.
Were you thinking, what's going on here?
Not right away. At first I simply enjoyed this feeling, this expanse, this infinity, this love. It felt like floating or hovering. I was under the impression that I was coming round, but I had lost all memory. I was pure being in this light. Then I suddenly noticed a presence, as if there was an entity made of light to my left.
Das war so wie, als wäre auf meiner linken Seite eine Lichtgestalt. Und zwar, also ich nenne es jetzt mal ein Engel.
Let's call it an angel. But it really was simply an amorphous shape of light. It resembled a white, hazy entity, which was immersed in an immense golden light, like an enormous golden yellowish aura around this formless figure. It is hard to describe this. And it was enormously tall. This companion, I felt him to be of a male type, showed me there is something else. He also reminded me that I wasn't finished just yet. He then accompanied me so that I could say my goodbyes. This process evolved in stages. At first, my companion and I went back to the apartment I shared with my fiancé at the time, who was now my husband. Felt like saying my farewell to all material things and matter as such. I became aware that I was now actually dying. I hadn't even known this earlier. It was simply a beautiful experience. But then I realized, okay, I am now leaving this earthly existence behind. My perception was greatly enhanced. So I wandered through the apartment looking at this month's bills. For example, I also noticed, right, there's the laundry I had intended to do. And then I contemplated on how disruptive we tend to regard everything we leave behind when suddenly ripped from life. I was deliberating all this, but it isn't all that bad. I then realized that it doesn't matter how old you are when you die. It will always be harmonious for the soul and perfectly all right.
This thought of now leaving your earthly existence behind wasn't disconcerting at all?
Null. Also keine Sekunde.
In no way, not for a split second. There was simply this matter-of-fact realization. I am now dying. But there was no negative thought or hard feelings whatsoever associated with this. It wasn't even related to this feeling we often have in life when confronted with a sudden death. It wasn't anything like this, but simply, I am leaving now. And I was given an opportunity to say farewell to all material, all worldly things. Then I was stopped in my tracks and reminded that I am now consciously saying goodbye to my loved ones, but that I'd have all the time in the world to do so. I then perceived one person after another, one at a time, but not in the way that they actually were, and where they physically were at that moment, but I perceived them as a hologram, like a hovering soul. I very consciously said farewell to each and every one of them. While I was doing that, I became aware of what an immense shock this would be for them. And then the thought came to my mind that they would soon learn of my death, and how very difficult this would be for them. On one hand, I knew at this moment that it was okay for me to leave. On the other hand, I also knew how hard this would be on them, since they had had no opportunity to see me off. Maybe they still had something they felt they needed to share with me, or something they would have liked to hear from me. But I was quite certain that everything was perfectly fine now. This was how it was supposed to be. And yet, I knew it would be very hard on them. But regardless, it was absolutely fine, and I knew I had all the time in the world for this process of saying farewell. This companion didn't say anything like, "Come on, get on with it." I simply knew that I had as much time as I needed for this. When I had completed this process of saying goodbye, I turned to my companion and very consciously stated, "If now is the time, I am ready to go."
This experience of having all the time in the world, can we understand it as the absence of any measure of time?
Absolutely so, yes. I wasn't completely absent of space at first, for I noticed the physicality of our apartment. However, it was absent of all space and time in the sense of the totality of my being, pure and utter being.
What happened next?
Proceeding from there was very hard. When I had finished this inner monologue and had completed my departure, there was something like a mentally perceived bang, boom, and I landed back in my body. It really felt like a bang, and my soul was back in my body. It was utterly terrible. This was not a beautiful moment for me.
Did you experience your physical pain again?
Exactly in that moment, all my pain had returned. It felt much, much more difficult. For one, I was in all this pain again, and in addition to that, it felt like a punishment that I had to leave this wonderful place. And I also had this sensation that I was forced back into my body, and that it was much too small to accommodate me. There was this feeling that we have these minuscule bodies, while we are such gargantuan souls squeezed into such a tiny vessel. There was an additional pain at seeing myself forced back into this carnal envelope, and into a world that I perceived as too cold, too bright, too glaring, too cold and rigid. Coming back was really very hard on me.
The vividness was missing?
Exactly. And most of all, this expanse. It was this infinite expanse that I missed. And also this all-encompassing sense of being, this peace, this lightness, this being love immersed in love. Switching back from that felt very disruptive. And I wasn't being given a choice. I wasn't asked whether or not I wanted to go back down to earth. There was no other option. I was simply put in that situation. I found this hard to bear.
With all these dramatic feelings in your heart, how did things evolve? Did you get to talk about this with anyone?
For me, there was no doubt, not even for a fraction of a second, that I had had a near-death experience.
So you were familiar with this term?
I was familiar with the term, all right, yes. It was a clear fact for me that what I had gone through was absolutely real. But in the beginning, there was no one I could talk to about this. And even in the hospital, no one had noticed my experience. This seemed awkward to me because I felt I had been gone for hours. But in fact and truth today, and having returned to clear waking consciousness, I'm rather thinking it may have lasted for less than a second. I've no idea as to how long this experience really lasted, as I was connected to all this medical equipment, checking blood pressure, providing oxygen and so on. There was no alarm going off or anything. My experience went totally unnoticed. It was really only me who had this experience. I would have been unable to speak about it. But it was okay. It took me a very long time to accept that I am now back here once more. There was no hooray in the beginning, not in the least, but more so now. I enjoy being alive. But arriving at this was a long process, or thousands of processes. Back then it took me days to process the fact that I was back. In the beginning, my husband really was the only person I could describe my experience to.
What was his reaction?
He believed me right away, of course. He noticed that I was not piecing something imaginary together, but this was a real experience of mine.
Such a profound experience often alters the system of values in one's life. Are there things that have an altogether different meaning for you today as opposed to before?
Yes. I'd even go as far as saying everything has new value. It's a very multifaceted way of being. I have difficulty describing it. One alteration certainly was that since then I have lost my fear of dying. It is simply gone, totally gone. In the meantime, I have children, and of course I'm hoping to see them grow up into adulthood. Of course, I still have all the worldly feelings, all the hope that I'll be healthy for a long time, that too, of course. But I'm no longer afraid of death, because the most beautiful experience on earth was that of dying. So I lost my fear of it. Even in childhood, I used to be rather inquisitive, a seeker. I kept looking for meaning, for an answer to the why, and how it goes on after death. I was looking for God. I've always been the seeking type. This experience answered a lot of the questions I used to have. Today I am very, very grateful that I'm here. But it took a long time of processing. I went through a long crisis after my NDE.
Were you partial to a specific religious tradition earlier in life? Did your spirituality, your relationship with religion, change?
It did change. My mother was a Protestant, my father a Roman Catholic. During my upbringing, we rarely went to church. My parents seemed to have an experience of life which was very different from mine. Their sentience seemed to be of a different nature than mine. When growing up, I learned that either there is no God at all, or if there was a God, then I used to see it like this. If there is a God, he must be cruel because he allows all this agony in the world, all the atrocities, famine, war, suffering, and so on. But I've always had a feeling that this can't be true, at least not for me. My idea was different. I felt that there was a vividness, a living, loving force that created us and everything else. I was the questioning type as a child, a seeker. I may have been at the age of 10 or 12 years when I started reading the Bible frequently and of my own volition. I found it to be fascinating. For example, when I had issues that were raised or when I went through a crisis of some kind. I wasn't a quiet child, but there was never anyone in my immediate family that I could have discussed any of my big concerns with, or my perception of things which I used to have. I had to come to terms with all of this on my own. As a teen, I was a member of an extra-clerical congregation for some time. I kept looking for answers by way of the church service. I had always been on a quest to find the living God. I educated myself about Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, all that while I was still a child or teen. I felt this vibrant sensation, this vibrancy inside of me. I also had a deep love for nature as a child. I kept looking for this vibrancy, the all-encompassing love. I kept looking for it and kept finding it everywhere. When my father fell ill, I became very conflicted. All of a sudden, I lost this deep trust and confidence in all things being good. I thought to myself, why? So I actually got really angry with God or with the divine. Like, why are you doing this to him, to us? Such a wonderful man, full of life. He wants to live, he fights for his life. He's leaning in all the way and he never hurt a fly. You are doing this to him. Where is the justice in that? I repeatedly found myself at odds with these feelings. I remember it well. Countless times I tried to negotiate with God or the universe or whatever name we want to call it by. I wanted a deal. I kept saying, look, my father wants to live and he's suffering. Take me instead of him. You can have me instead. I will die and he recovers in return. I am ready to go. That was my infantile way of coping with the situation. I thought this would be a cool deal, because I was not clinging to life, whereas he was. However, my NDE taught me that my time had not yet come. There was a huge lesson in that for me. It isn't up to us to say when we leave or don't.
But in essence, your NDE confirmed the presence of a loving deity?
Absolutely. And yet, since my NDE, I stopped looking for a higher truth in church or through religion, but rather I experienced this loving kindness in everything. I perceive, I feel, let me call it the divine in everything I come across, and have arrived at a general understanding that everything can be regarded as an opportunity for further learning and further insights. Following my NDE, I suffered a number of breakdowns, recurring nervous breakdowns. I suffered from major depression for a very long time. I was given pharmacological drugs. I was really going through the meat grinder for a long time, until I found my way back to life, and I had repeated bouts of excessive alcohol abuse. I remember how devastated I once was one Friday morning at 10 or 11. I found myself literally on the ground, completely drunk. And I asked myself, did you really want this for me? Did I have to come back for this? Is that the kind of life you wanted for me from now on? I was completely desperate and wasn't bent on life at all anymore. I also felt very guilty because I kept thinking, on one hand, you got a wonderful husband. You got it all and you're still not content. I wasn't up to anything, but couldn't find my way back to more benevolent thoughts. There I was, lying on the ground, and asking myself, so this is your life now? This is what I returned for? Then suddenly I heard this voice inside of me that said, stop feeling sorry for yourself and start practicing gratitude. Felt like this phrase that found me. I was kind of almost overwhelmed because I couldn't help thinking, yeah, great. Be grateful for what exactly? That I'm here? I don't want to be here. But after that day, I started giving thanks. Only at night in the beginning. First, I didn't really feel it or mean it. On the first day, I simply said, okay, thank you that I have a roof over my head. I didn't really feel the gratitude inside, but I simply spoke the words to myself, as if to say, if he wants me to be grateful, well, all right, I'll do as I'm told. And I gave thanks on the following day again. I continued for 2-3 days. Then I thought to myself, thank you that I have a roof and enough food and this great husband at my side. Then I found more things to be thankful for. I have a great job, a great boss, great colleagues at work. I have a great social life and I get to live in a really cool and hip apartment. The list of things grew, the point here being I began feeling it too. The list kept getting longer and longer. In the beginning, I used to ask myself before going to bed, what am I grateful for? At first, there were only mundane things, but they kept getting more diverse. It was through this practice that I began to realize that I'm here to do some living. So I even started giving thanks for things that might not appear all that great at first sight. I would give thanks for my chores or challenges or even for difficult conversations because I was learning something from them. What would I do similarly, or what would I do differently next time around? I made a daily routine of ending the day in gratitude. Soon after, I would start the day by giving thanks just for getting to open my eyes to a new day. I continued with all this until I felt this to be like an ongoing practice of saying thank you. I even got a tattoo of the Hawaiian word for thank you. These are the things that accompany me throughout my days, every day, simply this enormous gratitude for having had the opportunity to go on living. Previously I existed. I may have lived to an extent, but today there is a new degree of intensity to it all, regardless of the actual events, regardless of whether or not I experience a sensation of flow, or whether things are all smooth sailing, whether I'm having a personal crisis and no idea of how to overcome it, or how things will turn out. It doesn't matter. I'm really very grateful for having succeeded in processing my experiences in this way.
What's your position today on the issue you used to have with God, allowing this much calamity?
Meanwhile, I've arrived at the insight that we're here to have a learning experience. We're not just here to chill out and enjoy ourselves, but effectively to address the experiences we're still to integrate, or which we haven't fully grasped yet. I liken it to a gem coming here in order to receive a finishing grind. We want to be fine-sanded. We yearn for experience. And for this, our playground earth is very, very valuable. Oftentimes, learning is associated with pain for me, but I was graced with the experience of even getting to alter that pain. As a child, I learnt that pain is a means of punishment. I had done something wrong and was punished, and then there was pain. Or you had moved carelessly and may have taken a fall, and it resulted in pain as well. Wrong equals pain. That's how it used to be for me. But I was blessed with altering this understanding in me and realized, all right, this painful experience is like an allegory. When you have children, you tell them hundreds of thousands of times not to touch the hot stove tops, that they're going to get burnt. We want to protect the child. We keep cautioning them hundreds of times. But when this child touches the hot stove while unmonitored, they get hurt. They burn their fingers. Yet this is the exact moment when they learn the meaning of hot and why they're not supposed to touch this. I managed to apply this childlike metaphor in my own life. There is no divine entity out there seeking to punish us, but we're here on earth having exactly those experiences that our soul still yearns to experience, maybe in order to become complete. At the same time, I get the feeling that souls are already complete, but I still believe it's about this bounty of experiences. We want to learn and experience it all, and that may cause some pain in the process. Today, I can regard these painful experiences anew. When there is pain in life, be it physical in nature or emotional pain, or pain in my soul, I immediately realize, ouch, ouch. I'm learning. I may not like it that much while I'm in the process of working through something. It is still hard, but I don't immediately fall prey to seeing myself as a victim as I used to. I rather become aware that this now is a grave and hard experience. I'm having a learning experience. So I give thanks, and that is a profound change in me.
Would you go as far as saying that all pain and suffering is being put in perspective in regard to this phenomenal loving light experience with which our human consciousness is actually tied?
I think so, yes. I have another personal metaphor for this kind of insight. It is an allegory by Padre Pio that I once heard about. It is a parable, one I recall every time I get the feeling all I see is chaos or injustice or whatever.
Ich sehe nur Chaos oder ich sehe Ungerechtigkeit oder was auch immer.
What he said was this.
Hat das so erklärt.
Once there was a little boy sitting next to his mother, who was busy with some embroidery. She had a wooden frame with embroidery attached to it. The small boy kept looking up towards his mother, but was only able to see the lower part of her work. So he asked her, "Mummy, what are you doing there? There are so many threads, it looks plain and ugly. There really isn't anything beautiful there. What's the point in doing this? And you keep at it for hours on end." Then the mother tilted her piece of embroidery down towards her son, and he was able to see the upper surface, the design as it were. And he saw that it was a beautiful picture with harmonious colours and shapes. Padre Pio would have said that this is a symbolic metaphor. Humans are like this little boy. We look at the world and all we see is chaos, devastation, and all that which is horrible. But throughout our incarnation, we are incapable of seeing the divine perspective. We don't have access to it. This parable helps me to understand, aha, there most certainly is a divine order behind the chaos and facade, which I don't necessarily need to understand while here. But I can always have faith that it exists. Nonetheless, I'm convinced that we all have a big responsibility. Responsibility for ourselves first and foremost. I can't go around in this world and keep doing bad things and then tell myself that somewhere there is a divine order in all this. All I need to do is to follow my selfish drives. No, not that. Instead, I see us carrying a huge responsibility for ourselves, for our neighbour, very much so. Maybe I need to mention this as an appendix.
On your spiritual journey, there was another breakthrough about 10 years ago when you started seeing spirit beings. How did this happen?
At first it started very subtly. All of a sudden I would keep seeing my paternal grandfather. I was on vacation with my family in the south of Italy. Suddenly my grandpa appeared to me in this apartment there. I wasn't startled at all by this apparition at first. I simply perceived his presence, and I knew that he had telepathically given me the message, "Go find my badge of honour from the wall." I had no idea at all at this time that we had something like this in our household. It was as if Grandpa and I were looking for his badge together, and we found it. But I had no idea what to do with it. I simply took it with me. When I was back at home in Switzerland, I would perceive him again, and in the beginning I felt some pressure on me from this, because I kept thinking, hasn't he progressed into the light? Was he really not able to let go? Do I have to support him in some way so he'll be well? It started with him. At first I really was only able to perceive him, and it turned out to be very useful for me. I was able to resolve a lot of unresolved accounts in me with his help. This was like a beginning for me, through which I noticed, hey, there's more. At first I was frightened, and again there was no one to share this with. I thought, what if I told anyone I had my deceased nonno at my side? That would be weird. 2 or 3 days later, when checking the mailbox, a neighbour passed me and went, "Hello there, Michelle, how are you?" "Thanks, I'm fine." "Did you enjoy your vacation?" Yes, thank you." And then she gave me this look, paused for a moment, and then asked, "Who is this guy you brought home from your vacation?" I was shocked and asked her, "Can you see him?" And she said, "Yes, if you're referring to the elderly gentleman to your left who looks like your grandpa, then yes." This was another milestone. I knew I wasn't alone with this ability. But at first it simply registered with me. I was given the opportunity to resolve a lot with his help. It wasn't until later that I started various training programs and started evolving and practicing this ability with commitment, to the point of becoming capable of consciously deciding when I would allow these perceptions in and when not. It was a long process spanning many years.
How are you dealing with this today? Is your ability to see spirit beings a persisting trait? Or can you sort of switch it off and on?
I'm organising it in a meticulous fashion today. I'm well aware of my schedule and my day-to-day obligations, about the times I am conversing with someone and other times that I'm going about my work. I really keep to my routines rigidly. When I'm working, I kind of switch my senses on. I have presence of mind and scan the spirit world for whoever shows up. But when I'm going about more mundane chores routinely, I'm not interested in making contact. For example, I can see people's emotions. I can see their aura in a pronounced way. But for mundane chores, I don't need to know exactly how everyone is at any particular moment.
You mentioned your work. How did your professional life evolve after your NDE?
I did a 180. At first, I was a pharmacist by trade and used to work in retail sales. I had 3 children in the meantime. I took up various courses of vocational training at first. I looked to train my perceptions, expand my knowledge, and because I was keenly interested in those things, that still applies today. I'm like a sponge. I enjoy soaking up new information. It wasn't until later that I felt a desire to incorporate this in my work. This was much later. The professional service I offer today is being a companion for people who find themselves in a challenging or otherwise intense situation. I do one-on-one sessions and apply a diverse set of tools. I also enjoy giving evening lectures and seminars that are about finding your authentic self, practicing your perceptions, and fine-tuning them for maximum focus and being all present. It is kind of a motto for me to say, from victim to creator, in the sense of taking charge of our life. That's my calling. And simply offering assistance with blockages of any kind, or if there is an unresolved issue, or when we're stuck with something.
On your website, we learned that you're now also occupying yourself with work revolving around the issues of reincarnation. Is reincarnation a reality for you?
For me, and I have to stress that this is only my personal view, it is a given. But I'm personally aware that each of us have their own truth. Everyone has their own version of reality, and I'm adamant about this being a sacred fact. For me, reincarnation is a fact. I remember momentary experiences of regression as a child and in my youth. I wasn't intentionally eliciting them, but those moments with memories of past lives simply happened upon me. I was conflicted because of them, since I wasn't aware that these things existed. And traditional congregations reject reincarnation. They say this doesn't exist, and that one should stay away from it. But I kept questioning, and the answer I received always was, no, this doesn't exist. It was a beautiful relief for me later on to find that I can consciously investigate this. When I would have these memories as a child, I wasn't able to resolve the underlying pattern associated with them. Meanwhile, I'm blessed with the insight that we have an opportunity to look at a situation in the past, distill its essence, and resolve inherent conflicts so that we become strengthened and get to move on with our present life. About reincarnation therapy, I only offer past life regression when a person explicitly asks for it. And usually it's like this. Most of the issues we face in our current lives really hail from this incarnation and personal history, going all the way back to our time in the womb. And then there are those things which we can't find an explanation for. Often these are phobias, irrational phobias. And it gets very interesting when exploring them and asking for reasons for any specific type of fear or phobia, such as, why is it that I'm afraid of this or that?
And have you found for yourself that there was a continuity in the issues you are facing now and the glimpses into past lives brought forth to your conscious mind?
Very much so. I view this as a kind of addendum. I had many insights telling me how much we carry inside. We aren't as one-dimensional as we like to think. Instead, we're carrying over a large bundle of experiences when coming here. And another interesting thing, when recalling my own past lives for a moment, the ones I was permitted to take a look at anyway, I can't really see a straight line of enhancement between then and now. So time and space are a mystery again. There were lives that my consciousness had evolved much further than now. And then there were lives in which I was rolling very differently than I do today. There is a wide range of diversity.
And devoid of a linear progression between them?
Certainly not a linear progression, no. I wouldn't be able to say otherwise. They were rather complementary to each other. I was a perpetrator in one life and a victim in another. I was all kinds of people. And to me, there is an understanding that this is what it's really all about. I can now relate much better to reactions I get from any particular person when knowing that I have been there myself once.
Do you view reincarnation as an opportunity for personal evolution? Or is it rather something that we're all experiencing?
It's a difficult question. I think about a third of the global population believe in reincarnation. In this part of the world, we are dominated by Christianity, which isn't really a proponent of reincarnation. I tend to be very, very careful with my statements on reincarnation. I keep stressing my personal perception of this. It is my experience. I arrived at the conclusion that each of us are on their own individual itinerary. And it doesn't have to be limited to Earth alone. There are more ways of accumulating experience.
In summing it up, what is the most important insight you derived from your NDE and your spiritual journey at large? Maybe even as a message to everyone interested in finding out more about death and dying.
I'm driven by the hope that all of us will dare to live more intensely, that we all find the courage to be our most authentic self. And I believe that is really the essence of my work altogether, regardless of which forces I apply or what I see in the spirit world or not. It is always about support for us in our current incarnation and about consciously directing our lives, making the most of it. And that we bravely keep going and maybe express one or the other reaction which society at large can't make sense of, or which even we ourselves can't make sense of at the time. It's about finding the courage to widen our perception and look outside the box, bravely coming into acceptance of ourselves as who we are, and that we are less critical with ourselves, but accept ourselves in our authentic being, warts and all, the whole enchilada we carry in this life, that is a lot in and of itself already. And I believe when we become capable of being more accepting of ourselves in all our shining moments, and also including all drawbacks, we can then manage to love and honour everyone else in their authentic expression of self. I think that really is the alpha and the omega. And while we're at it, we shouldn't forget about enjoying ourselves, set the drama aside whenever we can, and lift our eyes, and give thanks for all the good things we are blessed with.
And I thank you, Ms. Bögli. All the best with your work. Many thanks for talking to me.
Vielen herzlichen Dank für das Gespräch.
Danke Ihnen.